So good afternoon, everyone. You're very welcome to our webinar today on the lessons learned from GDPR and what we can learn to apply the EU AI Act in our data protection day-to-day jobs. So my name is Tom Gilligan. I'm on the executive committee of ADPO and help get these events up and running. And I'm joined today by Harry Chambers from OneTrust, who's going to walk us through the AI Act and what it means for DPOs. But before we do that, I just have a few messages that I want to share with you. So first of all, just to remind you that ADPO does have a range of training courses, both our long-established GDPR Data Protection Essentials course, but also our revised and updated Navigating NIS2 from theory to practice. So a lot of work has gone into that, and I'd highly recommend it to anyone who needs to get up to date on the impact of NIS2 on your business or organization. The other thing just to mention, for those of you who are members of ADPO or the Irish Computer Society, you will have got an email earlier saying that our new member area will be going live today. And I believe that the invites for the individual logins is also starting to go out. So again, I'd recommend that you watch out for that email and click on the links and get yourself set up on the new member area. There's a whole range of new items in there. I'm just going to get them up here for me to look at. So there's more training, events, and obviously you'll be able to watch the recording of this webinar. Exclusive content just for members. Obviously some networking, you're able to link in with other DPOs who are members. Some additional resources. CPD tracking, again, that hasn't been working for a few years, so that'll be back at working again. And some forums and stuff like that where you can find help or look for help from others, DPOs, about how you might actually tackle a topic or not. So highly recommend it. Please do log into it. And then the last thing to mention is the upcoming CEDPO. As you know, ADPO is a member of CEDPO. They have their inaugural conference coming up on the 14th of October in Brussels. Again, a range of really interesting subjects. Just looking down here at my notes, as the topics are the DPO in the digital age, looking back at the survey that we did earlier in the year about the DPO in his own words, which was looking back at the second EDPB enforcement forum from 2023. The third session is on GDPR, the age of maturity. And the final section is on mastering subject access requests, which of course is the subject of the 2024 EDPB enforcement action. So very, very topical subjects. There's a reduced rate for ADPO members. It's 190 euros as opposed to the full fee. So, and also a number of our speakers from ADPO. So Jara Brown is speaking, our former chairperson. Maria Maloney, who's also on the executive committee, will be speaking. And a couple of Irish speakers as well. Cian O'Brien from the DPC is also speaking. And Paul Jordan, who leads CEDPO, is the main lead for the day. And again, an Irishman, but living in Brussels for a good few years now at this stage. So I'd say you're all very welcome. And we're going to look today at the impact of the EU AI Act and what we can learn from the rollout of GDPR for the AI Act. And I'm joined today by Harry Chambers, who's a principal privacy analyst for OneTrust. Harry has extensive knowledge and experience in this area. So Harry, without further ado, I maybe might ask you the AI Act obviously was passed in June and came into force on the beginning of August. So what does that mean for people? And you might talk us through that first.
Sure. So hi everyone, great to meet you. And yeah, if you work in data protection, and unless you've been living under a rock for the past couple of years, you won't have heard anything about the AI Act. But today, I'll hopefully give you a brief overview. So even if you had, you'll be up to scratch with what you need to do. And we'll also be covering how the AI Act relates to the GDPR, as Tom said. So firstly, today, I just want to cover sort of some of the basics with the AI Act and its scope of application, particular terms that are used within it that are quite specific. And then also I'm going to outline sort of throughout the webinar as well, how they differ when it comes to the GDPR as well. Some quite distinct applications and different terminology that I'll take care to mention. So one of the most notable things here is that we have particular terms under the Act in that it classifies AI systems and AI models into different sections. So we have mostly, and this is something that we're seeing to be adopted amongst other legal frameworks around the world as well, is that AI systems are being categorized based on their risk levels. So firstly, we've got high risk AI systems. These are systems which are identified based on their potential impact on the safety and the fundamental rights of individuals. Businesses which deploy any high-risk AI systems will have to comply with the most stringent requirements under the AI Act. This includes particular risk management obligations, transparency, and particular assessment procedures as well. The AI Act, and this was seen when it was first, not when it was first introduced, but later on when we had large language models like ChatGPT come onto the scene and become much more popular. The concept of general purpose AI models, or GPAI models, were introduced to the AI Act. These are models which are, again, and a lot of people will be familiar with them. They're capable of performing a wide range of tasks. They can be integrated into lots of different applications. Providers of GPAIs have to adhere to very specific obligations. Again, this, like the GDPR in many sense, this includes maintaining up-to-date technical documentation, transparency obligations about the GPAI's capabilities and its limitations as well. GPAI models specifically are subject to this idea of systemic risk. So the European Commission is capable of designating certain GPAI models of having systemic risk if they have high impact capabilities or a very significant impact on the market. But this is still distinct largely from the idea of high risk systems. We have the prohibited AI systems, which I'll talk about quite shortly. But at that sort of lower level, below high risk systems, we've got minimal risk AI systems, have largely no obligations under the EU AI Act. This could just be spam filters. But then we also have AI systems with very specific transparency risks, like chatbots. Here, obligations relate generally to disclosure to end users, so certain labeling requirements for AI-generated content, by and large, letting users know that they're interacting with an AI system as well. And then one of the areas that I think it's quite important to distinguish between the AI Act and, say, the GDPR is also in terms of its scope as well. The GDPR is largely technology agnostic and applies to just the processing of personal data. The AI Act is slightly different here. The AI Act largely refers to the placing on the market or the putting into service of different AI systems. More specifically, it applies to the placing on the market or putting into service of AI systems in the EU, and this is regardless of where the provider is located, so it has that extraterritorial applicability. The placing on the market of general purpose AI models in the EU, again, regardless of where a provider may be located. And then also AI systems established or located outside the EU, but where the output is produced by AI systems used in the EU as well. And then we'll come on to this idea later, but when it comes to the idea of a deployer of an AI system, the AI Act will apply to deployers within the scope of the AI Act if they're established or located in the EU, or they're established or located outside the EU, but again, the output produced by the AI system is used in the EU as well. So again, just some of these basic ideas of providers or deployers, the scope of the Act, and then also the different classifications based on the risk level of an AI system as well. And then maybe just moving on to the next slide here, Tom, quickly. This is the timeline for the AI Act. As we mentioned, it entered into force at the beginning of August this year, but it enters into force of a very varied time frame. One of the things that organizations should really take into account is this, again, this idea of prohibited AI systems. These are systems that present an unacceptable risk, and I'll really go into these in detail much later on in terms of what systems these are. But this is where organizations should almost look first. On February 2025, just next year, only a couple of months away now, we have a transition period where these provisions will enter into force. Next, then, we have the Code of Practice on General Purpose AI Models. This had a 9-month transition period for when the Act went into force in August of this year. So these provisions will enter into force in May 2025. But then overall, all the provisions related to general purpose AI models have a 12-month transition period. So looking all the way to next year in August 2025. Then we have the provisions on high-risk AI models under Annex 3 of the EU AI Act. These have that 24-month transition period from August, so we'll be looking to August in 2026. But then we also have provisions for high-risk AI systems that have obligations covered under Annex 1 of the AI Act. This is quite specific. These are provisions relating to existing EU product legislation. These have the longest time frame. Here it's a 36-month transition period from the August of this year. So we're looking to August 2027. But by and large, nearly all the provisions of the AI Act apply from August 2nd, 2026, save for that exception I meant for obligations relating to already existing EU product legislation as well. But even still here, the timeframes seemingly appear clear-cut. We need to look at some of the exceptions. So any high-risk AI systems that have already been placed in the market, and there are many, 24 months before the entry into force of the AI Act, so looking to that August date, won't be subject to the AI Act unless significant changes are made to their design. Relating to other sort of timeframes, particular member states have until August 2nd, 2025 to designate any national competent authorities who will actually oversee the application of the EU AI Act and then carry out any market surveillance or activities. This is definitely worth noting. A lot of member states in the EU still haven't actually designated the relevant market authority who will supervise the application of the EU AI Act. And then even within those authorities that have, lots of jurisdictions have taken a varied approach in how a particular authority will will enforce the AI Act. Spain and France, for instance, seem to have taken a very different approach to the Dutch Data Protection Authority. Just going on to the next slide here on prohibited AI systems. So today I've talked a lot about the idea of prohibited AI systems. What actually are these? So we've got a range of different systems that you can see on your screen here. We have those systems which could potentially facilitate manipulative or exploitative practices. These are AI systems that aim to or result in the distortment of human behavior in a way that could cause significant harm. We have AI systems that constitute social rating systems, so systems used by public or private actors for the social rating of natural persons, and that then lead to discriminatory outcomes and the marginalization of certain groups. We also have real-time remote biometric identification systems. So any system for real-time remote biometric identification of natural persons in publicly accessible spaces for law enforcement purposes is generally prohibited, though, again, there are exceptions to this. Biometric categorization. So any AI system based on biometric data and used to deduce or infer sensitive characteristics or attributes of individuals is also prohibited. And then finally, we also have emotion recognition systems. So the use of AI systems to identify or infer the emotions or intentions of natural persons based on their biometric data in work and educational contexts is also prohibited. So it's definitely worth looking into from an organizational perspective whether any AI system you look into fits into any of these prohibited systems. Firstly, because the time frame is coming up soonest in February of 2025, but also because this can potentially apply to a wide range of different systems, particularly when it comes to the use of biometrics as well. And then just the next slide. So I promised I would talk about it, but today we have the idea of different conceptions of providers. We have generally deployers versus providers, but then we have also other terms like importers and distributors, making a very big difference to the idea of controllers or processors and then sub-processors under the GDPR. So generally, providers are the entity or the individual that develop the AI system. This includes general purpose AI models, and then that place it or put it on the market or put it in service under its own name or trademark, whether for payment or free of charge. And then we have deployers. So these are the entity or the individual that use the AI system under their own responsibility. And generally, and this is something I'm aware of, most organizations won't be a provider of an AI system. Most organizations will be in the place of a deployer. So today, whilst I talk a lot about providers, I'll also try and give acknowledgement as to the fact that most organizations will be in the role of a deployer. But then it's also worth talking about these two other unique roles that are mentioned under the AI Act, this idea of an importer or a distributor. So importers are persons located or established in the EU that places an AI system on the market and that bear the name or the trademark of a natural person or legal person established in a third country. And then we have distributors. So distributors are a person in the supply chain other than the provider or the importer that then makes an AI system available on the EU market. And for any organization's compliance program, it's definitely, again, alongside figuring out whether your AI system is high risk, is prohibited, it presents minimal risk or no risk at all. It's also worth figuring out whether you fit into any of these different personas under the AI Act as well. And I'll talk about them more later on and the obligations each one is subject to. So as we talked about today, there are a lot of specific obligations that apply to organizations under the AI Act. Generally, they fit into a wide range of different categories. We have risk management. So providers of any high-risk AI system have to implement robust risk management systems to identify, to assess, or to mitigate any potential risks. This includes, very similar to the GDPR, regular audits and assessments to ensure compliance. We have conformity assessments. These are simply under the AI Act. These are simply to assess whether any requirements for high-risk AI systems have been fulfilled. We also have fundamental rights impact assessments. So any bodies governed by public law or private entities providing public services, or when they deploy any high-risk systems intended to be used, say, in assessing the creditworthiness of natural persons or establish their credit score, or for risk assessment and pricing in relation to natural persons in areas like life and health insurance, we'll need to conduct a fundamental rights impact assessment. And you can probably already tell this sounds very similar to other ideas that we have under the GDPR, like a data protection impact assessment as well. Outside of risk management, we also have very specific transparency obligations. Again, a principle that's mentioned under the GDPR. So deployers specifically, when it comes to transparency under the AI Act, have to maintain very detailed documentation of the AI system's design, its development, and its deployment processes, their particular disclosure requirements. So deployers of AI systems that generate or manipulate content, like deepfakes, have to disclose that the content has been artificially generated or manipulated. High-risk AI systems as well that do this have to be accompanied by instructions to use. The instructions have to be relevant, they have to be accessible, and they have to be comprehensible as well. They have to include the contact details of a provider, any characteristics and limits of the AI system. What are the human oversight measures that are used for this particular system? And then what are the mechanisms that allow deployers to collect, store, and interpret any logs under the AI Act as well? So we're already seeing, again, more similarities with the GDPR in terms of these rough ideas and principles. When it comes to record keeping as well, high-risk organizations that use high-risk AI systems, providers or deployers, have to automatically collect logs for traceability purposes. Logs need to enable the identification of situations that present risk. Logs should also cover the period of use of AI systems, the reference database against which input data is collected, and the identification of natural persons involved in the verification of the results of the AI system as well. And something I mentioned as well is this idea of human oversight. The AI Act requires that high-risk AI systems have an appropriate level of human oversight and control. Specifically, if you're a high-risk AI system under Annex 3 of the AI Act, no action or decision may be taken by a deployer on the basis of the identification by the AI system, unless the identification has been verified and confirmed by at least 2 natural persons with necessary compliant competence, training, and authority. Again, this doesn't actually apply to any high-risk AI system used for law enforcement, for migration, border control, or asylum requirements subject to EU law. But again, there's particular requirements here, and notice that I mentioned the idea of appropriate training and authority. So persons are subject to, or persons that are required to conduct human oversight under the AI Act need to understand the relevant capacities and limitations of AI systems. So there's kind of training requirements similar to those specified under the GDPR. Persons responsible for human oversight need to monitor the operation of that AI system. And they need to be aware that you can over-rely on the output of an AI system. And they also need to be responsible for deciding, in particular situations, whether or not to use an AI system or to disregard, override, or even reverse the output of an AI system. When it comes to deployers, perhaps specifically, deployers, unlike providers, are going to much more be likely to have direct interaction with individual end users. So they're going to be responsible, again, for, like we've already talked about, informing end users of that they're going to be subject to a high-risk AI system. They need to conduct impact assessments. They need to be capable of explaining decisions to individuals, again, in very comprehensible, easily understandable language. Deployers need to report if a system presents a risk to the health, safety, or fundamental rights of persons, linking back to that idea of fundamental rights impact assessments. Deployers also need to report serious incidents, and they need to cooperate and provide information to providers and any competent market supervisory authority in the jurisdiction they're situated in. And then next slide.
All right. So, Harry, that was super. A very brief overview of the whole AI Act and what it might mean for us, and certainly the concept of deployers. I think certainly I can see that many of the people I work with will be deployers more than um, uh, people who've written the actual AI itself. But in terms of just considering the GDPR and the AI, I think certainly the first thing that struck me is you mentioned that the GDPR is technologically agnostic. So what does that mean in practical terms for the differences and similarities between the two?
Sure. So yeah, as you mentioned, Tom, GDPR is technology agnostic. Generally, it applies to the processing of personal information regardless, whereas the AI Act applies to just all types of information that are used within AI systems. So this means that generally the principles of the GDPR will still apply wherever personal information is used. So, and we see this, in parts within the AI Act itself. So principles like lawfulness, fairness and transparency, data minimization, accuracy, purpose limitation, storage limitation, integrity and confidentiality, and then accountability all still apply to personal information that's used by providers or deployers in an AI system when processing personal information as well. One of the areas that it's great to see this in is actually in the actions of supervisory authorities, any guidance that's been provided by them. I think a great example of this is actually in by the Dutch Data Protection Authority, the AP. So the Dutch Data Protection Authority provided a set of guidelines when it came to data scraping. Data scraping is just one of the methods that a lot of AI systems will actually get their training data, and in nearly every case will also include some level of personal information. And in doing so, the Dutch Data Protection Authority basically outlined how data protection or organizations, providers, or deployers may be in compliance with the GDPR when training or deploying an AI system on that scraped personal data. They outline that when scraping personal data, organizations still need to have a legal basis under Article 6 of the GDPR. They outline that when they're scraping personal data for AI systems, organizations still need to be in compliance with principles under Article 5.1 of the GDPR. Again, like I've said, they need to comply with general principles like purpose limitation, data minimization, accuracy, storage limitation, integrity, and confidentiality. So by and large, all of these obligations still apply.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned about the data scraping because certainly I see when I read data processing agreements or data sharing agreements now, I read those sections about what the other side can do with the data in a new light, because I'm always thinking, oh, are they going to use that data for training their AI models? Even if it wasn't originally intended for that, does it allow it? And certainly, I'd be recommending to people that they knock it out of the agreements where necessary. There's no clear use of it. Are you seeing that in practice or?
In terms of data scraping, I mean, by and
Well,
large,
no,
this.
I suppose data, terms in contracts that are allowing data to be used for AI purposes, and again, trying to help organizations to prevent that leakage, even if it was unintentional.
I mean, so by and large, looking at sort of that contractual level as well, as you said, most organizations are going to be from the deployer side rather than the provider side. And this is sort of particularly important sort of to have in these contractual arrangements to make sure that you fit into either of these two definitions as well. I hope I don't go on too much of a tangent here about sort of, again, how a provider can almost become a deployer as well.
Yeah.
And that although these definitions I've mentioned, they seem very clear cut and they're defined by the AI Act, they're still sort of dependent on the actual operation or the AI system itself. So providers generally bear overall responsibility for ensuring compliance and the safety of AI systems. Traditionally, they would be the entity that designs, builds, or develops the AI model or system, and this should be apparent in a contract. They could be an AI developer or a machine learning specialist, which would be seen then as a provider. But under the AI Act, even if an entity outsources the development of an AI system or a general purpose AI model, but is responsible again for this idea, it's not about the processing of data, but it's whether it placed it on the market or put it into service, that entity would then be the provider. So, for example, when an entity procures a service of a third-party AI developer or a machine learning specialist to design or develop that AI system, but it uses an entity's own data, again, sharing that data, materials, or even algorithms that are developed by the deployer in this context, that entity could then become a provider. But on the other hand, it's also very possible that in this context where you're contracting a third party, an AI, again, an AI developer, a machine learning specialist to almost build your AI system, because that developer or specialist doesn't actually place it on the market or put it into service, it may not play any role and may not even have any obligations under the AI Act. It's also possible, though, that both the deployer, the entity, and the developer are both providers if components of the AI system are placed on the market by the developer or, again, that specialist or that machine learning specialist. Again, it's, I think here, Article 25(1) of the AI Act is sort of worth considering, in that it outlines that a deployer or third party will actually be considered a provider of, say, a high-risk AI system, and will then assume all of its obligations if it puts its name or trademark on a high-risk AI system placed on the market or put in service, if it makes a substantial modification to that high-risk AI system placed on the market or put in service, such that it remains then a high-risk AI system, or if it modifies the intended purpose of an AI system, which hasn't been classified as a high-risk AI system in the past, and is now, because it's been modified, a high-risk AI system. So this idea of making sure within a contract that, again, no name or trademark, say, is put on a high-risk AI system, so you don't transition from being a provider to or deployer to a provider, making substantial modifications to a high-risk AI system. So again, you don't go from being a deployer to a provider and then subject to such obligations, or then later on modifying an AI system so that it becomes high risk, and going from being a deployer to a provider is something that organizations need to look to when they're making contractual arrangements.
Thanks, Harry. And actually, one of the questions in the chat there from Paula, and I'll just read that. I think you've actually answered it. So a third-party processor under contract is using AI to facilitate a service, and it appears that they are processing personal data within the AI tool. What's the situation here as we are using their service, but not necessarily deploying ourselves? So effectively, we're in our data protection language, you're the controller, you've asked for a service, the third party is providing it with their AI. So they'll be the deployer, won't they? They're the ones responsible, and we're the deployer, and they're the ones offering the product. Is that right?
Yeah, it's something that organizations will need to look into. It's unfortunately not as clear cut yet with as much guidance and authority out there as when it comes to controllers and processors. Article 25 specifically under the AI Act is very useful here for organizations. It outlines essentially what deployers will need to do when it comes to their status as either staying a deployer or becoming a provider. Article 25.2 specifically outlines that you just need to really closely cooperate with a provider. You need to make sure that from a deployer's perspective, you have all the necessary information, all the expected technical access and other assistance required for that provider to fulfill its obligations. This is particularly important where, say, the provider in this case is only putting its name or trademark on the high risk AI system if it has actually little involvement in its design or development, and you need to make sure that there are clear contractual requirements in this case as well. You
Okay.
also need to make sure that the initial provider isn't actually also obliged to undertake any cooperation if it's specified that the system isn't to be changed to a type of AI system that could then be considered a high risk system. It's also important to mention that providers of AI systems include clear and enforceable contractual provisions to make sure that any third parties downstream, and this includes a deployer, have the capacity of modifying the AI system. So it's making sure that in any contract you have with any party when it comes to an AI system, they're very clear contractual provisions. It's not as simple as, say, under the GDPR, as specifying that an individual may be a controller or a processor.
Okay, great. And then Paul has asked a question. I suppose I had a similar question too, and maybe mine's a bit more general. And so you mentioned there's a lot of similarities in terms of minimization and lawfulness and transparency between GDPR and the AI Act. So I suppose how should DPOs live with this, or how do they make these coexist? Do I need to have both documents in my hand when I'm doing my work, or how do you think they should coexist?
So regulatory authorities have been pretty useful here. Obviously, there seem to be a lot of similarities just in terms of the actual terminology of, the GDPR and the AI Act specifically. This idea of different impact assessments. So, under Article 35 of the GDPR, we've got data protection impact assessments. These need to be performed on high risk processing operations. Needs to be performed, particularly in the cases of, for accountability purposes. It applies specifically to new technologies. Although it's not always required, it's now generally pretty much best practices for understanding processing operations. And of course, AI would generally fit in most cases into this idea of a new technology being used. When it comes to, say, for instance, conformity assessments, these just need to be conducted in circumstances very similar to DPIAs, where there's a risk to health, safety, and the fundamental rights of individuals. But they're required most, and this is most important to consider, they're required whether or not personal information is being processed. So they're required in just any case where the AI system is used, rather than personal information as well. Conformity assessments are also much more holistic. They aim to understand generally how the AI system was developed, its data set, how the learning process was developed, what the AI's behavior is like, and then also its impact on society. It generally considers a lot more ethical considerations. But they'll also, as a result of that, they'll take on a lot of the considerations that will be present in, say, DPIAs or other features. They'll take on other features like product safety. They'll also be a bit more technical than a DPIA. So generally, from guidance from regulatory authorities, is that, say, a conformity assessment specifically can actually supplement a DPIA and they'll inform one another. So DPIA would almost be part of a larger conformity assessment used for an AI system. That conformity assessment will be wider, taking in more considerations, be a bit more technically driven. So you need to include more stakeholders than just, say, a DPO and a privacy team under DPIA. When it comes to fundamental rights impact assessments, again, although this isn't actually specifically addressed under the AI Act, it has been addressed by regulatory authorities. So the French Data Protection Authority, for instance, the CNIL, has outlined that deployers are going to be able to rely on a DPIA that's already been carried out to conduct a fundamental rights impact assessment required under the AI Act. The DPIA and the fundamental rights impact assessment could even be brought together in a single document. CNIL basically outlined that the single objective of both a DPIA and a fundamental rights impact assessment is to enable all necessary measures to be taken to limit risks to health, safety, and fundamental rights of persons likely to be impacted or affected by an AI system. But generally, by and large, when it comes to these assessments, the main difference is what I said at the start, is that DPIAs only apply to personal information, but conformity assessments or fundamental rights impact assessments apply to all types of AI systems, regardless of whether personal information is used. Again, I'm sort of sorry I can let you go, Tom, but this idea of the Dutch Data Protection Authority, when it came to data scraping, pretty much outlined that in nearly every case where personal data is collected for training purposes, in nearly every case, this is actually going to include personal information as well. So although there is this distinction between assessments under the AI Act focusing on all types of data rather than just personal and DPIAs, in most cases, you're still going to have personal information within a system somewhere. Data scraping, again, and the Dutch Data Protection Authority guidelines sort of clarified this, is the collecting or just generally of information to train algorithms, the collecting of questions or complaints from any potential customers of an organization via any online channels or social media or review websites. And then it's just the monitoring of online messages about an organization. So any information collected on reputation management or sales or marketing, again, would be considered data scraping. And the Dutch Data Protection Authority has taken quite a unique stance here, and as it said, it's going to be very tough on this. So yeah, it's very important to distinguish that. Again, although we have the difference between AI assessments and personal information assessments, by and large, a lot of the time, personal information will be collected within AI systems anyway.
Okay. Now, I think that brings nicely on to the second part of Paul's question there, is about organizations being able to reconcile the tensions. And I suppose my question is, like, who should be doing the fundamental rights impact assessment? And as we all know, DPOs are not supposed to complete DPIAs. They're supposed to just review and comment on them. But in reality, we're often heavily involved in the drafting of them, or put more correctly, the correction of the things that have been written in the original DPIA. So where do you see, who's going to be doing the role of the AI champion, and how will that live with the existing DPO role?
So this is a really interesting question because, again, although the AI Act is really long, it doesn't actually specify who's responsible for completing it. We have this idea of an authorized representative. This is mentioned quite a lot under the AI Act. But the authorized representative under the AI Act is an obligation generally specific to providers rather than deployers. And the authorized representative isn't exactly designated as the individual responsible for conducting a conformity assessment or a fundamental rights impact assessment. Generally, they're more responsible for registration and contact requirements for supervisory authorities in the EU or for organizations that then use AI systems. But regulatory authorities in Europe have been pretty useful here in clarifying what is the role of a DPO specifically here. The German Data Protection Conference, the DSK, has essentially recommended that data protection officers or any other employee representative involved in privacy should be involved in decision-making regarding AI applications. They need to ensure that any compliance decisions and concerns have been addressed. This is pretty much some of the only specific outline on what an actual DPO role would be. But more generally, we can also look at to other standards and frameworks. So one of the ISO standards has already recommended, for the purpose of accountability, the appointment of a senior individual responsible for AI risk management. In doing so, they basically note that in terms of establishing a wider AI governance program, the assignment of roles to individuals is particularly important. They outline the need for leaders in compliance, legal, and particularly privacy to take a role here. But as I've sort of mentioned, when it comes to the assessments, they're a bit different to privacy overall. They'll have a bit more of a technical aspect. They'll take into ethical considerations as well. So it's less about the role of a privacy officer specifically, who, again, as you said, Tom, like responsible for just reviewing a DPI rather than conducting it overall. We'll need to look to a lot of other individuals and stakeholders. We may want to look at different, say a customer representative, somebody who will be impacted by an AI system and will have direct contact with end users. We'll want to look at IT leaders because of the very technical aspect of AI systems as well. These will be individuals that will actually be responsible for using the AI, integrating it into the IT infrastructure of an organization already. And then just because of the risk of high risk AI systems as well, we'll also want to look at executive business leaders as well. We'll want to get the buy-in from senior leadership when we use any AI system. The only problem with some of these standards and frameworks is that they consider it from the perspective of a very large organization with all these different assigned roles and capabilities, less so from the position of a smaller organization. So in the case of a smaller organization where you both function as a DPO, as an IT leader, you'd find yourself very involved in the AI governance program, in supervising it.
Yeah, indeed. We all know that, I think. All right, so maybe we might just move on to so now we know all the background and we know the similarities and the differences between the two pieces of legislation. So what should organizations be doing and how might the DPOs play their part in helping their organization get ready for the AI Act?
Sure. So one of the things that I've talked about today is obviously that timeline as well. Firstly, really organizations need to look at the AI systems that they're already using, how it fits into their organization as a whole. They need to figure out whether they fit into those particular definitions of a provider or a deployer, and then how that can change as well in the contractual arrangements that they have or they then make with an AI system or provider. Mostly, again, most organizations will be in that deployer position. They really need to make sure that they either remain in that deployer position or that they're prepared to take on the obligations expected of providers as well, which are generally much more onerous, and there are many more of them as well. And then also consider, again, those timelines, figuring out what your AI system actually is. Firstly, when it comes to prohibited AI systems, figuring out whether any AI system you actually use is actually a prohibited AI system. This is the first deadline coming up, and it's also where the fines are most significant. I know we had them on at the start, but for fines when it comes to prohibited AI systems, they're up to 35 million euros or 7% of the worldwide annual turnover of a group that's in violation of any prohibited AI practices. So it's definitely worth making sure that you're on board when it comes to prohibited AI systems, even before you start taking on the requirements related to high-risk AI systems as well. There's still lots of unknowables here, but again, like I've talked about today already, there's lots of helpful guidance out there. There are a lot of standards and frameworks that organizations can look to, even outside of the EU perspective. Even from the US, we can look to the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, the NIST AI Risk Management Framework. The NIST AI Risk Management Framework is actually very similar to the AI Act in sort of its principles in terms of the requirements, but the AI RMF is actually a bit different. It's industry agnostic. It offers voluntary guidance, it's not a legal requirement like the AI Act. But it just allows organizations to be a bit more informed decisions, any internal determination relating to AI risk identification, management, and governance. We see very similar ideas to the NIST AI RMF compared to the AI Act, this idea of documentation. The AI RMF recommends documenting the results of actions throughout the AI lifecycle. This includes documenting the risks, the potential impact of AI systems. It recommends the development of strategies to minimize and limit any negative impacts and then associated risks. And then also outlines that they need to document intended uses and system limitations as well, alongside documenting how you're actually going to provide user instructions or deployer instructions, and then a human oversight process as well, all requirements that are also required under the AI Act as well. The NIST AI RMF also recommends the incorporation of testing, again, also a requirement required under the AI Act. There's a need for ongoing monitoring of AI systems once they've been deployed, making sure that the system is still valid, that the output's still valid, the output is reliable and free from bias. Both the NIST AI RMF and the AI Act outline that testing is the method by which organizations should verify the efficacy of an organization's controls and identify any emerging risks and mitigation needs as well. When it comes to risk assessments as well, and it's something we've talked about a lot, both within the AI Act and the GDPR, the AI RMF, which is fully fledged, outlines that risk assessments should be used to categorize the impact of AI systems on any vulnerable populations. Assessments should be used to consider the scientific integrity and design decisions of an AI system, alongside assessing the performance metrics or any residual risk calculations of an AI system as well. This is quite technical, but even more practically, we have guidance from European authorities as well. Again, the French Data Protection Authority, CNIL, has actually produced a set of frequently asked questions and recommendations on the deployment of AI systems. And these fit in quite well into the principles of data protection that we have under the GDPR. CNIL recommends that organizations really need to start from a concrete need. So organizations should really avoid just deploying generative AI without a specific goal and actually use it to identify identified business uses. Not just deploying generative AI because it looks cool and somebody on LinkedIn was talking about it. Organizations need to supervise its uses. Organizations really should define authorized and prohibited uses when it comes to AI. You don't want employees using AI to submit any confidential information, entering any personal information, which, as we now know as well, it's very difficult to get any information out of an AI system once it's put in as well. Again, going back to sort of this idea of what the French Data Protection Authority said about starting from a very concrete need, organizations shouldn't also ignore the limitations of any AI systems. We need to consider the potential risks, again, the rights and interests of any persons involved. And then the actual system itself is very important. There are a lot of brand names out there when it comes to AI systems, but they may not actually be that useful for your particular business need. If are we starting out with a very broad generative AI system, what knowledge base are we connecting it to? Do we need to then fine tune it on very specific organizational data that's provided by the deployer? This is blurring the definition of what a deployer and a provider is. They're very practical considerations as well that aren't necessarily mentioned under the AI Act either. We need to make sure that the security of the AI system is paramount. We need to make sure that there's a potential use that a provider, from a deployer perspective, potentially reuses any data that's been provided downstream. We need to make sure that the AI system we use is free of any biases as well. And then sorry, Tom, go on.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you there, Harry, but so that actually, one of the questions there in the chat was asked by Fintan, basically, I guess, saying about ChatGPT or OpenAI's, that they actually openly say in their privacy policy that, they're given the technical complexity of our models, we may not be able to correct the inaccuracy in every instance. And so, I think the question Fintan was asking is, are all AI systems incapable of fully meeting the data protection principles? And I suppose, again, we've all seen that OpenAI actually openly state that, you should check things for yourself. That's their way of protecting it. But presumably what you're also saying, though, as well, is that, our fundamental rights impact or data protection impact, we'd call out the fact that in that instance, the generality of the model may introduce inaccuracy, whereas maybe in other models that are very specific, and say, I'm thinking here of if you're using X-rays or radiology scans for training an AI model to spot a cancer, that may be very specific and accurate, but also would have human oversight as well. And you document all that in these documents to show you thought about it. And that's the key thing. Am I on the right track here?
So it's actually very interesting talking about, how the access of organizations to, generative AI systems. And this was actually addressed just last week by the Court of Justice of the European Union. The CJU published the opinion of the Advocate General when it came to automated decision making under the GDPR and data subject right of access as well. And it particularly related to how the right of access and automated decision making actually needs to be weighed against this idea of trade secrets or how complex AI systems actually are. So the Advocate General generally outlined in this case that meaningful information about logic involved in automated decision making needs to enable data subjects still to exercise their data subject rights under the GDPR. It needs to ensure that they can still obtain information that's concise, very easily accessible, easy to understand, and that the information is formulated in a clear and plain language on the method and criteria used in such decisions. So automated decision making still needs to be presented to individuals, even in such complex systems, in a very clear manner. And this was something that was really notable about it, is that the Advocate General now noted that controllers, in this case, using the concepts under the GDPR rather than the AI Act, it said that controllers can't rely on the complexity of information to refuse obligations provided for under the GDPR, particularly when it comes to the right of access. And that it falls to the controller to provide information that is both accessible and complete to data subjects so that they can understand the process of an automated decision. Basically, they outline that data subjects need to understand what information was used in an automated decision and how it was taken into account and weighted. And then when it comes to this idea of trade secrets or information within an AI system that is potentially argued by an AI system provider that is so complex that they can't provide it, or it would be a business risk, the Advocate General has noted that where the data subject access and information is provided may actually inform on the rights and freedom of others, the information should still be disclosed to a competent supervisory authority so that they can weigh up whether the interests involved are and let them determine whether the rights of access should be granted or whether it actually inform on trade secrets as well. So we're already seeing pretty interesting case law here as to whether organizations actually have to disclose sort of the inner workings of AI systems when it comes to automated decision making. But generally, by and large, AI systems, it appears right now, shouldn't just be a black box and, when it comes to decision making or their use.
Yeah. So that brings us nicely to Kieran's question, which said, how should organizations prevent supply chain attacks in a typical black box environment of AI? So it sounds to me like you're saying if some salesman turns up to your door and say, oh, ours is a black box, you should run a mile. Is that the gist of it, or is it more complex than that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously incorporation of like principles under the GDPR still need to be taken into account, particularly when it comes to transparency as well. We need to make sure that organizations, we see this sort of when it comes to data protection decisions taken by supervisory authorities all the way back last year. We saw the Italian Data Protection Authority, the Garante, which pretty much banned ChatGPT for a couple of days by OpenAI because there was no information provided to users. It didn't provide any information to interested parties whose data was collected and processed through ChatGPT. It essentially was a black box at that point. There was an absence of any legal basis for the collection of information there. The information itself that was processed may have been inaccurate. As again, you mentioned, ChatGPT wasn't always right, so it didn't even necessarily correspond to the real data as well. And of course, the Garante actually then reinstated ChatGPT later after a series of commitments by OpenAI. But that was only after, as you said, OpenAI actually amended sort of any regulations when it came to the use of ChatGPT. They amended and clarified mechanisms and solutions relating to that enabled users to exercise their data subject rights, making sure that the system wasn't totally a black box system. They made sure that the right to opt out of processing of personal data for the training of algorithms when it came to ChatGPT was also available to Italian users. So only after those steps had been taken by OpenAI did the Italian Data Protection Authority actually allow its operation again in Italy. So when it comes to, yeah, black box AI systems, definitely something to be aware of. Transparency is still just as much a requirement under the GDPR as it is under the AI Act as well. You have very clear disclosure requirements that need to be complied with.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm conscious we're running out of time. Had a really good discussion, but maybe just to move it on and say the last section here, and maybe I think you've mentioned a lot of the other things I was going to ask about, but again, giving people going back to their real work in 5 minutes, in terms of how this actually is working for organizations at the moment. There's lots of people coming along, and every solution that you see is AI enabled or LLM enabled, and even sometimes I think they're just fancy spreadsheets with a macro. But in terms of like what we're seeing in practice, in terms of like employment screening, AML screening, credit scoring, what should DPOs be thinking about when new DPIAs probably are coming across their desk that have mentioned LLMs and AI within them? How should they start to tackle that?
At sort of those first basic steps, the very clear context you mentioned, like a lot of organizations very practically, there may be a general purpose AI system, but a lot of organizations will say, oh, we've got AI incorporated into this and, whatever. There's already a lot of examples out there where organizations have had regulatory action taken against them as well, where they haven't actually, when they're making basically false representations about how much AI there actually is in a particular technology. But you need to look at, say, what the definition of a high risk AI system is when it comes to, say, employment. The AI Act is very clear here, and that high risk system includes those used in recruitment or selection processes. Any AI system, again, used in making decisions affecting work related relationships, that could be promotions, terminations, or even allocating tasks based on particular personal traits, that would be considered a high risk AI system and thus subject to distinct responsibilities as well. When it comes to creditworthiness as well, a lot of obligations here. We need to look at the fact that particular, systems will be subject to, could be subject to, there could be a risk of bias, there could be poor treatment. They're very basic systems, basic requirements that could lead to further fraud or systemic risks as well. And these would all be considered high risk AI systems as a result if they result in bias. When it comes to, a lot of people talk about KYC checks. If we're using like biometric data there, for instance, real-time remote biometric identification again would be considered potentially a prohibited system, or other types of biometric identification could then just be considered high risk. And although that's much better than a prohibited system, again, it's subject to its own very specific requirements as well.
All right, we might just take David's question there as well. So he said about the prohibition on emotional interference apply not just to employees but to customers, similar to the workplace smoking ban. So I guess that might be an easy one, is it? Or from what you've taught us?
Under prohibited systems, let me just see here. So in this context, the AI Act is pretty clear in sort of where it applies, even if it's applied not just in the employment context, but used in the context of anything, particularly and make sure to mention publicly accessible spaces is where they be prohibited as well. Biometric data is definitely subject to some of the most stringent requirements under the AI Act. And even if it doesn't then fit into a prohibited system, because it may not be used in a publicly accessible space, but it's used in the employment context as well, it would still be subject to the requirements of a high-risk AI system.
Okay. So we're almost out of time. I've posted up some resources there in the chat for people to follow. The recording will be available. I just have one last question for you, Harry. And I suppose you've mentioned the Sunil and you've mentioned the Dutch AP, and I think you also mentioned the Americans for NIST, their NIST guidance in terms of AI. Are they the three key ones, or are there other ones you'd like to mention that we should go and use afterwards?
I think definitely the EU AI Act is quite distinct. And obviously, for any organization that's using AI in Europe or in relation to data scraped from Europe or used in European data, it's something you need to take into account. But I think because all the requirements still need to be fleshed out, I think pay attention to the guidance issued by regulatory authorities in Europe. I think the French Data Protection Authority, the Spanish, and the Federal German Data Protection Conference have all been really, really helpful in the terms of the guidance and recommendations that they've provided to help comply with the EU AI Act. I think other standards and frameworks like NIST, as I've said, like the ISO standards at a practical level have been very helpful as well. Casting a wider net as well. I think the Singapore model generative AI governance framework is really useful to look at. It outlines 11 principles, a lot of which correspond to both the AI Act and the GDPR. That's really helpful to look at. Again, very similar principles like transparency, fairness, accountability, I think is definitely worth taking a look at. But AI system and regulation of it are getting bigger and bigger every day. We see this in California. California, very similar to the CCPA. Again, maybe the next place where we see a lot of AI regulation, and for any organization really, because of the AI scene out in California, will need to take account of, what are the requirements for these AI systems and these new AI laws as well.
Yeah, so thanks, Harry. I believe that you can't see the chat, so I've posted the resources there in the Q&A in the answer to question 7. Hopefully you can see it. So listen, Harry, thanks very much. There will be a poll as part of the materials that we send out afterwards. Again, looking to see if OneTrust can help anybody with their AI implementation. And we'd like to say thanks very much to Harry and to his colleague Julia, who've been very helpful in getting this all set up. And we very much appreciate your time, Harry. So thanks very much. I think everyone found it very, very helpful. So much appreciated. And thank you. Thanks to everyone for taking an hour out of your day. Very much. We hope you got something out of it. And we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar, which will come up in October. So Harry, thank you.
No problem. Thank you very much.